Brenda and this is my friend Kimberly. Today we're going to talk about mandatory death penalty. So Kimberly, what is mandatory death penalty?
Mandatory death penalty is also called as capital punishment. It is one of the legal process in which a person is punished and put to death for a crime by the government.
So how many countries have this mandatory death penalty?
There are 195 countries in the world today, but only around 50 countries that actually retain mandatory death penalty.
I see. So does our country, Malaysia, have this mandatory death penalty?
Yes, in our country, Malaysia do have mandatory death penalty for so many years after our independence. However, there has been a public debate recently as to whether Malaysia should abolish mandatory death penalty, as this is considered the ultimate denial of human rights. Have you heard about there are actually many different types of cruel methods in death penalty?
Yeah, there's actually different ways whereby the mandatory death penalty is carried out, such as lethal injection, shooting, beheading. All these are very cruel way whereby the mandatory death penalty is carried out, but it only applies to those who have committed very serious crime.
Oh, okay.
So Kimberly, do you think mandatory death penalty is good?
I think this is a very controversial issue, right? There's always two sides of point in these arguments. It's very hard to say for me. Like for example, if you take a look at our neighbor country Singapore, they actually have death penalty, and also they are very well known for being one of the safest country in the world. On the other hand, like New Zealand and Canada, they do not have death penalty, but they are also considered a very safe country with very low crime rates as well. This is why there has been always a overwhelming discussion going on in Malaysia.
I see. Therefore, our group today, we are going to discuss about the reasons, the advantages, disadvantages of this mandatory death penalty, and we're going to conclude and see whether Malaysia should abolish or retain mandatory death penalty.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the main reasons for mandatory death penalty is to deter members of the society from committing unlawful actions. When criminals are sentenced to death and being executed, it will instill fear into the minds of potential criminals. Hence, this will make those potential criminals to think twice and act rationally before engaging in serious criminal activities, because they know that they will lose their life. For example, in Malaysia, death penalty for drug trafficking was made mandatory in 1983. The main reason for this was because at that time, drug trafficking was considered as a national challenge in Malaysia, and the Malaysian government believes that imposing death penalty would help to deter those people. This is shown in the case of Barlow and Chambers 1986, where two Australians were convicted of drug trafficking were sentenced to death. Before the sentencing, the Australian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bill Hayden, actually made an appeal for clemency to the Malaysian government, as well as the British government also joined in the appeal, hoping to spare the two men. However, in the end, the judge held that there were no alternative but to impose death sentence the only death sentence known to law, which is death to the accused. This decision has caused public objection and strained political relations between Australia and Malaysia. The Prime Minister at that time, Tun Mahathir, supported our Malaysian judge's decision by saying that our government is not apologetic about the severity of the case, and that anyone who breaks the Malaysian law will have to pay accordingly, regardless of their colour or nationality. Similarly, in Singapore, the government has also have a very firm stance on death penalty. The Senior Parliamentary for Home Affairs, Amin, stated that death penalty has acted as an effective deterrent for serious crime in Singapore. He stated that the numbers of crimes committed with firearms fell sharply after the Singaporean government, introduced the mandatory death penalty for such offences in 1973. While till today, Singapore is considered as has one of the lowest murder rates in the world. He also added that death penalty has deterred major drug syndicates from establishing themselves in Singapore. and this has helped to reduce the supply of drugs in Singapore. In 2016, the Singaporean government actually held a survey with their citizens to ask them about their opinion on death penalty. And 80% of the respondents felt that death penalty should be retained, and that 82% agreed that the death penalty acts as an important deterrent and has actually helped to keep Singapore safe from serious crime. Another reason for mandatory death penalty is to ensure criminals receive punishment that is in proportion to the crime they've committed. This theory believes that a just society requires death penalty in order to uphold justice for the victim. For the most cruel and hideous crime, the ones for which death penalty is applied, offenders deserve the worst punishment under our system of law, and that is death penalty. Any lesser punishment would undermine the value society places on protecting lives. For example, Robert Macy, a district authority of Oklahoma City, describes this concept in one of his cases, whereby and this case is about a young mother who was helpless and had to watch her baby being executed, and the mother in the end was then injured and killed. Robert Macy stated that the killer should not lie in the same prison with 3 meals a day, clean sheets, cable TV, family visits, and endless appeal. For justice to prevail, some killers just need to die. Another reason for capital punishment is that it acts as a closure to survivors or the victim's family. It is a daunting experience and emotional distress for survivors of murder or rape to appear in public trial with intense media scrutiny, or the families of murder victims, the grief, the anger they had to endure losing someone they love. Through capital punishment, it will enable the victim's family to end the ordeal and move forward with their lives. Moving on, my friend Zusian will talk about the advantages of having the mandatory death penalty.
Advantages of the mandatory death penalty, but I'm going to state the 3 of them today. The very first one is retribution. And what is retribution? It is defined as a punishment inflicted on someone as vengeance for a wrong or criminal act. Punishment with death is considered to be fair retribution for serious crimes, especially in the case of murder, rape, and drugs. The society may express their moral outrage at offensive conduct, and we cannot deny that morality requires vengeance to evidence the society's abhorrence of the act. The having of mandatory death penalty is also a revenge and the only justice that can be given to the victims that suffer from raping or killing that the criminal inflicted on them. In an address, Pope Pius VIII said in September 1952, when there is a question of the execution of a condemned man, the state does not dispose of the individual's right to life. In this case, it is reserved to the public power to deprive the enjoyment of life of the condemned person in expiation of his crime, as when by his crime he has already disposed himself of his right to live. In the same vein, it was also observed in Furman's case that the instinct for retribution is part of the nature of man, and channeling that instinct in the administration of criminal justice serves an important purpose in promoting the stability of a society governed by law. The theory of retribution rests in part on the Old Testament, which is a Jewish Bible, and is called for an eye for an eye. For example, each criminal should get what his crime deserves. On the other hand, the cost of prison is also reduced by having the mandatory death penalty. There will be no further maintenance costs that are needed to be borne for the offender by the state once he is executed. Besides that, the prison population can be maintained at manageable levels. We can create more spaces and opportunities for the individuals that are willing to work and receive rehabilitation program by separating those who are convicted of a capital crime. Last but not least, the mandatory death penalty is also used as a prevention of re-offending that serves a purpose of incapacitation of dangerous criminals. Can you ever imagine that if life imprisonment is the maximum penalty, we cannot ensure that the offender who has been serving a sentence of life imprisonment will not continue to murder or attack the fellow inmates. It is obvious that the threat of an escape that the alternative sentence such as life imprisonment would create can be stopped, and it irrevocably is the fastest way to stop a murderer from continuing to kill people or cause chaos to the society, and also to eliminate their ability to do so. My friend Kyle is going to talk about the disadvantages of having mandatory death sentence.
Disadvantages of having mandatory death sentence is failure of being a deterrent. There are people who support the death penalty is an exceptional deterrent against crime, but some have argued that these claims are baseless. There is a significant increase in the number of murder cases in Malaysia between 2006 and 2016. Abolitionists may argue that despite the imposition of death sentence for these offences, the pattern of crime levels shows that it has failed to deter individuals from committing these crimes. The number of arrests and cases under the Dangerous Drugs Act 1952 in this year 2013 to 2017 have been increasing, and it is a very worrying sign. This shows that drugs are still a major issue of concern despite the harsh penalties. I think that drug mules and runners willing to take the risk despite the death sentence, as they are desperate for money. Next, one of the main arguments that abolitionists tend to abolish death penalty is violation of human rights. Everyone has the right to life, and no one has the right to take the life of another person. Many have also questioned the rather brutal nature of some of the methods of execution, such as electrocution, hanging, death by firing squad, and stoning. Although the use of the current execution methods is meant to bring about a quick and swift death, the implementation of the sentence may not go as planned in some cases. Abolitionists also believe that every person convicted of the crime has the right to reform, the right to a second chance in life. In this case, the death penalty is a one-way sentence. The criminal is executed and removed from society without a chance of repenting, as one would get in alternative sentences such as long-term imprisonment. Lastly, miscarriage of justice, where the possibility of executing an innocent person. In Malaysia, the case of Hu Yuwa, who was sentenced to death for drug trafficking and remains on death row in Bentong prison after 7 years, is an example of cases that police had made a mishandling of evidence and improper investigation that lead to wrongful conviction of individuals. In the United Kingdom, there was a series of shocking wrongful convictions for very serious crimes. In the case of Timothy Evans, who was wrongfully convicted and hanged in 1950 for the murder of his wife and 2 children, the murders were later believed to have been committed by his friend and co-tenant, who is John Christie. His case played a major part in the abolition of capital punishment for murder in the United Kingdom. The fact remains that judges who are responsible for meting out sentence to the convicted are human beings who are subject to error and misjudgments. In the case of the death penalty, the execution of an innocent is indeed a miscarriage of justice, as once a life is taken, it cannot be repaid. Next, my friend Kelly will be talking about Commonwealth countries that abolishing mandatory death sentence.
One example of Commonwealth country that have abolished mandatory death penalty is New Zealand. The death sentence was last used in 1957 and abolished for all crime including treason is in 1989. So what is the method of execution that always have been used? It was always by hanging. At first, there were many possible execution sites all around the country, but later there were only 2 sites that hanging can be carried out, which were the Wellington, the capital of the New Zealand, and Auckland, which is now the largest city in New Zealand. The offences that carried the death penalty in New Zealand were murder, treason, and piracy. In 1842, the case of Virginia against Maketu, the court held that Wiremu Kingi Maketu was found guilty of murdering 5 people in the Bay of Islands and was sentenced to death penalty. He was the first person to be executed in New Zealand. On the other hand, the last person to be executed before the abolishment of death penalty was Walter James Bolton. He was a farmer who was found guilty for poisoning his wife with arsenic.
So, the issue of mandatory death penalty became political when the Labour Party commuted all death sentences to life in prison, but the national government restored it in 1950. A free vote was held to abolish death penalty in 1961, and the result was that 10 members of the national government voted with the opposition, and hence the death penalty was removed from the statute book except for treason. Now, for example, according to Section 172, the Criminal Act 1961, everyone who commits murder is liable to imprisonment for life. Moreover, Canada is also one of the Commonwealth countries that have abolished the mandatory death penalty. Mandatory death penalty was removed from the Canadian Criminal Code in 1976. The Criminal Code is a law that codifies most criminal offences and procedures in Canada. Here, death penalty was replaced with a mandatory life sentence. In 1998, Canada removed the death penalty from military offences which are prosecuted under the Canadian National Defence Act, bringing Canadian military law in line with the civil law in Canada. It is difficult to state the accurate number for the execution of death penalty in Canada, as there were no systematic efforts to record the name, dates, and location of execution, and many records have been lost because of fire, floods, or decay. The only method used in Canada for death penalty was hanging. In 1868, Parliament also stated that the location of the execution was to be within the confines of the prison instead of public hangings. Peter Castle, a sailor, was found guilty for murder, and he was hanged 2 days later as a deterrent to the citizen. This is one of the earliest records of death penalty in Canada. The last execution in Canada was a double hanging at Toronto Don Jail for military execution. During the First World War, 25 Canadian soldiers were executed. Most were shot for service offences such as desertion and cowardice, but 2 executions were for murder. There was a man named Robert Bickerdike who believed the abolition of mandatory death penalty was a must. As a member of parliament, he introduced a bill to replace the death penalty with a life sentence. Then, after the expiration of the 5-year moratorium on the use of death penalty experiment, the partial ban on death penalty was continued. And finally, in 1976, our bill was passed in a free vote, resulting in the abolishment of death penalty in Canada. My friend Kimberly will be talking about the Commonwealth countries that maintain mandatory death sentence.
Now I'm going to talk about the Commonwealth countries that maintain mandatory death sentence. The example I'm going to talk about today will be Singapore. Capital punishment is a legal penalty in Singapore. The city had the second highest per capita rate in the world between 1994 and 1998. In 2018, 13 people were executed, the most since 2003. Singapore has had the capital punishment since it was a British colony and became independent before United Kingdom abolished the capital punishment. Each execution in Singapore is carried out by the long drop hanging in Changi Prison at dawn on Friday. I'm going to talk about the legislation under the Section 316 of the Criminal Procedure Code. When any person is sentenced to death, the sentence shall directly that he shall be hanged by the neck till he is dead, but shall not state the place, where, nor the time when the sentence is carried out. Neither the person under the age of 18 at the time of their offences or pregnant woman can be sentenced to death. Capital cases are heard by a single judge in the High Court. After conviction and sentencing, the sentence has one appeal to the Court of Appeal. If the appeal falls, the final resource rests with the President, who has the power to grant clemency on the advice of the Cabinet. Under the Penal Code, the commission of the following offence may result in the mandatory death penalty: piracy that endangers life, genocide resulting in death, and murder. In addition to the penal codes, there are also 4 acts of parliament that prescribe death as punishments for offences: Arms Offence Act, Misuse of Drugs Acts, Internal Security Acts, and Kidnapping Acts. Now I'm going to talk about the example cases: Asman, Janetine, and Harun versus McDonald House. On 10 March 1965, a bomb exploded at McDonald House along Orchard Road of Singapore. The bomb was planted by Indonesians during the period of Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation. The explosion killed 3 people and at least 33 others were injured. 2 Indonesians were caught later, found responsible for the bombing and sentenced to death. Both men were hanged on 17 October 1968 by the Singapore authorities. Another country I'm going to talk about is India. Capital punishment is a legal penalty in India. It has been carried out in 5 instances since 1995. A total of 26 executions have taken place in India since 1991. The most recent of which was in 2015. In colonial India, death was prescribed as one of the punishment in India Penal Code 1860, which listed a number of capital crimes. It remained in effect after independence in 1974. We talk about the example cases in India. The first hanging in independent India was that Nathuram Godse and Mahatma Gandhi assassination on 15 November 1949. In this case, he was murdered in Delhi. Assassin Nathuram had appealed against his conviction on the charge of conspiracy only. He neither challenged his conviction for murder nor the sentence of death passed on him. He actually executed in the Ambala jail.
In conclusion, we can say that the mandatory death penalty is a very controversial issue all over the world. Zixian, what is your opinion? Do you agree in retaining the mandatory death penalty, or you think we should abolish it?
Yes, I do agree that we should retain the mandatory death penalty as a maximum penalty to prevent the citizens from re-offending. They might be intimidated by the punishment and feel afraid to commit the crime. Even though the human right has given us the freedom to do what we want, we still need some limitations to mind our behaviors from harming the others.
Yes, I agree. What about Kai-En? What is your opinion? What do you think about this topic?
In my opinion, I agree that death penalty should be retained, but not in mandatory way. In the disadvantages that I stated before, mandatory death penalty could not resolve the issue of drug trafficking in Malaysia. Therefore, I think that mandatory death penalty should be replaced by discretionary death sentence.
Oh, that's interesting. May I know what is discretionary death sentence and what is the difference between mandatory death penalty and a discretionary death penalty?
So, in my own understanding, discretionary death sentence is when the judges given the discretion to sentence instead of convicts to the life imprisonment.
And so the difference between them is that with that mandatory death sentence, the judge must sentence the offender to death when he is found guilty. However, with the discretionary death sentence, the judge has the power to decide whether the offender deserves a lesser sentence or a death penalty.
So in conclusion, the death penalty has been shown with ample evidence to be an effective way to punish the offender. Perhaps the crime rate will even decrease once the criminals are afraid of losing something that they are concerned about it. For example, their life. So this will be the end of the discussion. Thank you.